Hi everybody, Josh Knight the First here with another episode of Ex-Aid Replay, coming to you with episode 17 of the series. Let's get right into it. So as we discussed last week, there's been a format change here in the show. After 3 weeks, this is the new norm. There is not going to be the opening of Excite played here at the beginning. They're going to play it somewhere during the middle of the episode. Now I'm not sure why they've decided to go ahead and do this, but this is the 3rd week, so I'm pretty sure this is the new norm. We should come to expect this. Mind you, I'm probably going to say this, and next week they'll put it back to normal, but whatever, this looks like the new norm for now. For the most part, this episode plays out as the quote-unquote good monster episode. There's been an episode like this for the last couple of years running, also for older series, definitely in Drive, also in Ghost, now here in Ex-Aid. We see a monster who breaks the norm. They're not necessarily trying to kill people, they actually want to get along with humans, but this plays out a little differently towards the end of the episode, and we'll go ahead and get into that. So the way this is going to work in this episode is we're going to talk about the Bugster first before we talk about the patient that the Bugster is infecting, given the way the story progresses. So our Bugster for the episode is Burgermon, or Burgmon, depending on who you're watching the subs from. He's a burger-type monster who is hosted within the body of Kobushi Tsukuru. Now that in and of itself is a pun there, because Tsukuru is the Japanese word to make something. So Kobushi, it turns out, was an employee of the Genmu Corporation until just recently. He had been very steeped in the creation of games in the absence of Kuroto-dan, who for obvious reasons is no longer there, but was also deeply involved in the creation of gashots. Now that's going to be very important for this episode, and potentially for later on in the series. Now this guy starts out with the best of intentions. He wants to develop games for the Genmu Corporation since Kuroto-dan is nowhere to be found. So one of the games he was working on was something he was already tasked with, which is the creation of this game called Juju Burger, which isn't a fighter game, it's not a puzzle game, it's just a game where you just put burgers together and that's it. Now once he finished with the game, the Bugster virus invaded the data of the game, which gave birth to Burgermon. Now Burgermon is actually the boss of the game. He's an enemy in name alone. Really, he's not there to defeat anybody, he's just there to be the boss of the game. Now even though he's initially frightened by the appearance of Burgermon, he is overcome with joy at seeing him in front of him. Now that makes sense when you look at this from the standpoint of a game developer. When you've been spending a lot of time, effort, energy, pouring yourself into this game, and then to legitimately see this thing come to life in front of you, why wouldn't you want to protect it? This is essentially your baby. And that's exactly how Tsukuru treats Burgermon. It's kind of a father-son relationship, and it's kind of sweet, but it also makes a lot of sense in the real world. So as such, Tsukuru wants to protect Burgermon, but of course the CR doesn't see it that way. They just see it as a Bugster initially, and the job is to defeat Bugsters, therefore the CR. So naturally, when Emu sees him, he has to defeat him, or so he thinks. Now the way they go about doing this is they introduce this level 4 Gasha. Now initially, we had said a couple of episodes back, and this does hold up culturally, that generally speaking, the Japanese want to stay away from the number 4. Now specifically for this particular Gashot and form, this actually goes along with a tie-in to the Happy Meal toy that they have over at McDonald's right now over in Japan, where that was just a promo card. But here we see that this is the Gashot that Tsukuru was working on, and so he gives this to Emu in order to help him further protect Burgermon from the likes of Snipe. Now on the plus side, we do see that Snipe is still a very capable writer, still very intelligent. He does respect Emu's writer prowess, let's say, but he's still kind of in a funny mode, kind of a comic relief mode, since now he's paired up with Saiba Nico. And to what end, we don't know yet, because at this point, she's not infected with Bugster virus, we already took care of that, so why are they even still together? Why are there some sort of pair? That doesn't make any sense to me. But as far as writers on the side of good go, they're the only two that can do anything, since we've lost Laser, and as of last episode, Hiro can't transform since his Gashots were taken away from him by Genmu. And speaking of which, it's a little interesting to see that even though that was taken away, and Kuroto-dan has said multiple times that he wants to be the game master, he wants to be the guy in charge, he took away those Gashots from Hiro only to develop them into even stronger versions. Now, I can only think of one possible explanation for this. The only thing I can think of is either 1, he's going to use them on himself, or 2, he was going to plan on giving them to Palad, since they're that thicker double Gashot that Palad seems to be using to become Paradox. Now midway through the episode, we have this kind of back and forth between everybody at the CR talking about Burgermon and how they're going to handle him, and we see Burgermon kind of dealing with this concept of the role of the enemy in a video game. Now Burgermon does seem to get the fact that he is the bad guy in this scenario, and that if he goes away, then Skuru gets better. But at the same time, he's not really harming anybody, and Skuru seems to take joy in his presence around him, so he doesn't quite know what to do. But in the end, he tries to make himself the target in order to do what he thinks is best to help the situation. The thing about it is, I really do appreciate it when we have these good monster episodes, because it kind of takes the concept of good and evil and delves into the gray area there, where he is from an evil nature. Granted, yes, the bugsters are there to infect people, they do cause damage, and they could potentially make somebody disappear, but at the same time, this one in particular, he's not one of the bad bunch. He's there trying to help. And because they're portraying him that way, that's going to give a lot more weight to what happens to him eventually towards the end of the episode. Towards the middle of the episode, we see that Emu has totally figured out that this is the case, that Burgermon doesn't want to hurt anybody, and he's also figured out what kind of game that Juju Burger actually is. So he manages to use that particular Gashot to beat the game in a way that doesn't harm anybody. Now this would be a good place to stop the episode if you wanted a happy ending, but so far Eggzade hasn't been giving us very many of those, so the episode continues to this dramatic ending. And the way they decide to bring this about is to have Genmu and Paradox come back in and ruin everybody's fun. Paradox decides he wants to fight Snipe and Eggzade. Genmu decides he wants to take away that Gashot because, again, Game Master, I'm the only one who can make games, screw you and your Burgermon. And then, of course, he uses Critical Dead to have Burgermon give himself up as a sacrifice to make sure that Skuru can still live, telling him, go on, make the games that make you happy. And for what it's worth, I actually believed this actor when he's there crying out his name, when he sacrifices himself to make sure he's not hit by Critical Dead. That's really good when you can commit yourself to a role like that, even if it might seem kind of childish. That's good on his part. The great thing I'm starting to see here is that we're starting to see naturally the growth of these seeds of dissension within Palad when he sees that Genmu had the choice to not destroy Burgermon, but he did it anyway, kind of out of nonchalantness, out of not caring. And since Palad is in fact a bugster, that's going to affect him a lot more. Now I know I was thinking that this episode from last week's preview was going to be a bit more lighthearted, and it was, but up to a point. It's the same thing we got back in the Christmas episode, and we all know how that went. I think that the series is being very wise about that, the way they're playing off both ends of the spectrum. We can be funny and goofy, but at the same time we're still plot driven and we're still trying to get the show forward. That's a very impressive way of doing things because I think over the last few years, they'll favor one thing over another in a particular episode, and then that'll leave some people alienated from how the episode was going along. As such, I'm very impressed with the way Eggzade has been growing as a show, because instead of being just this kitschy sort of 90s wacky commercial stuff that you would see on Nickelodeon, it takes that and then flips it on its head and gives you a story where you actually have to deal with these characters that you care about, with these situations where people could potentially die, and some have, and some might still. And who knows how that's going to play out into next week's episode when we see that Emu finally figures out for himself that he's got the bugster virus, whether or not that's because Kuroto-dan is telling him, or because he's kind of starting to disappear. That might be the dead giveaway. But you guys tell me what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Do you like the level 4 form, or do you wish it had just stayed a promo card for McDonald's? Were you happy to see Hero's dad in this episode? And oh my god, did you guys see that promo for the superhero Tyson movie? Laser's back! But of course, during the week, you can always follow me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been episode 17 of Eggzade Replay for episode 17 of the series, A Non-Standard Burgster. I'm JoshKnight1st. I'll see you guys again next week.